My job was to handle the distribution and sales, and I would say for 3 years, I don't think a case of beer or keg went out of that building that didn't go in the back of my F-350. I know for a fact I can put 16 kegs in a short bed. I didn't even have an 8-foot, but I had 6-foot F-350. I could put 15 kegs and 80 cases, and I was not overloaded, and I had nothing for a sag in my suspension. But that was about 3 years, and then we got to a box truck, and I ran the box truck for a long time while we were building out, the Shrewsbury Street location.
Welcome to the Founder's Story podcast, where we learn from entrepreneurs about their journey from their first inspiration to their first employee and even the steps they took to become the powerhouses they are today. Welcome back to another episode, everyone. My name is Rick Porter. I am your host, and today we are joined with David Fields. David, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
I'm excited to hear about this story. We've done a lot of research on this, and I'm really excited to hear it from you, kind of firsthand. We are talking about the founding story of Wormtown Brewery, which goes back quite a ways, but has a really good, solid roots in the city of Worcester. And so I'm excited to hear that story. Take me back to 2010 in Peppercorns?
Yeah, absolutely. But with anything, the day you open is certainly not when the story begins.
Yep.
And I do want to preface this for all of your listeners that I am certainly not the founder of Wormtown. My partner Ben Roesch and Tom Oliveri at the time were the guys, but I was with the team in a different capacity, which we'll talk a little bit about from the get-go, and then joined them very early on. So we are 11 years this year, 2021, and in 2009, Ben was working for another brewery where he served in a capacity where he brewed and packaged and sold the beer, right?
He was doing it all.
One-man show. I think it was his fourth professional brewing stop. He did his initial brewing training under Will Myers at Cambridge Brewery in Cambridge, and that's a fascinating story. If you ever look into Will Myers' brewing tree, if you will, kind of like a Belichick coaching tree, there's about 17 or 18 head brewers around the country who have all apprenticed under Will at some point in time. So there's some serious chops when you come out of that Cambridge system, and that's really what Ben did. Worked at Wachusett for a bit, worked at Neshoba for a bit, kind of got his commercial side, got a little bit of his distilling, a little bit of his venting at Neshoba and his brewing as well, which was pretty cool. But ultimately, he just had this vision very early on of a brewery in Worcester. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't very difficult. Second largest city in New England, no brewery. And had not had a brewery for 50-something years. You had a brew pub in Main Street Brewery, but 50 or 60 years had not been a brewery in the second largest city in New England, and it just made sense. And he was a Worcester guy. He was born and raised in Worcester, moved to Holden for high school. And he just had this idea, and he was selling this beer, and Tom Oliveri was buying his beer at Peppercorns and approached him one day and said, "You're pretty talented. Why are you doing this for somebody else?" And Ben said, "Well, it's funny you ask, because that's not what I want to do. I have a plan. I have an idea. This is what I want to do." And, Tom said, "I like everything that you're telling me. And I have an idea." And he walked him out to his ice cream shop that was attached to Peppercorns in a parking lot. And as Tom said to me, his inspiration for the ice cream addition to Peppercorns came from the Cape.
Okay.
And he killed it from May through September, October in his ice cream stand, and then realized that once October came, it was a tough business.
Yeah, it's a little cold for ice cream in October in Massachusetts.
Little cold for ice cream, and a parking lot on Park Ave in the city of Worcester is not quite the same environment as beachfront with sand in your toes as it is down the Cape. So, so he struggled with that a little bit, but he believed in what Ben was telling him. And he walked Ben through the ice cream store and said, "Can you turn this space into a working, functioning brewery?" And Ben said, "Absolutely, no question about it." So, at that point in time, Ben was already committed. Ben's background is forestry major at UMass Amherst. So he was connected to land management, and he loved the idea of sustainability back in 2000 whatever, before the word probably even existed in our vernacular. But he understood how our environment and our ecosystems interacted and connected, and right away he was piece of mass in every glass. Everything's going to be grown, or as much as we can grow and source from Massachusetts, was going to go into the beer. That led to the inspiration for a lot of our collaborations with local partners, and then he also wanted to brand the brewery around unique and creative and fun things that tied itself to the region and to the city itself, and the nickname Wormtown, that came from there. And Tom jumped in. They used Clark University to go ahead and get a small business loan. So Clark University, who actually owns the property that Peppercorns is on, a lot of people don't realize that, but he's a tenant of Clark. So he went straight to Clark. I believe it was a couple of students as kind of a senior project, as well as one of their professors worked on the grant writing process for them, helped them go out and get their initial grant, and that bought their first pieces of equipment, and really was one of the ways that it helped get the brewery funded and started through that process.
Fantastic. So, I mean, that's a great story. I would have never thought to reach out to the local colleges and universities for not only grant writing, but probably a lot of other resources that they could have helped out along the way. Now, when they first got started, it's a small space, completely unknown brand. How was those first couple years?
So that's kind of where I started coming into the picture a little bit. Ben, talented brewer, very, very, very smart guy. Tom obviously understood the restaurant business. Their goals early on were just make enough beer for Tom to sell in his two restaurants, Peppercorns and Prezzo's. And at that time I was working, actually owned a beer distributor that serviced the Worcester County area. And we didn't have a really great local brand. And I can remember on March 17th, 2010, which was their grand opening, grabbing one of my colleagues at our distributorship and saying, we need to go down there. We need to celebrate this. This is actually a really cool thing for beer and brewing, and for our industry in Worcester to have a brewery open up. And also at the same time, a little bit tongue in cheek, I didn't expect to be impressed. So I was kind of anticipating going down there and being like, oh my God, this is undrinkable.
This is awful.
I did. That's a true story. I've told it many, many, many times. And I went down, and I knew Tom because he'd been a customer for a long time. Didn't know Ben, but met him that night, spent a lot of time talking to him. I think that Tom was impressed that we had come down there and were that interested in his story and what it was they were trying to accomplish. But then Ben walked us through his vision for his beers. And I had 3 beers that day. The guy I was with, Shane, had 3 different beers, although I think we both had either Seven Hills or Be Hoppy. I had Seven Hills Be Hoppy, and I believe it was Worcester's Bravest, which was a wit beer. And Shane is a Belgian guy, and he went all Belgians that day, plus I think either Seven Hills or Be Hoppy. And I had 3 beers, and I looked at him and I said, what did you think? And he looked at me and said, if we had these beers in our portfolio, they would be 3 of the best beers we sell, and maybe the 3 best craft beers we sell. And at the time we carried Sierra Nevada, Magic Hat, some of the biggest breweries in that space, Red Hook Brewery, which was big out on the West Coast, never quite got as big out here, but we had a pretty good platform to look at. And I looked at him and said, man, I tried 2 styles tonight that I don't generally love, and these beers were amazing. So we left that night, March 17th, 2010, looking at Tom and Ben and saying, what were your plans? What do you hope to accomplish with this brewery over time?
Yep.
And I know Tom looked at me and he said, make enough beer for my tap room or for my restaurant, maybe 2 or 3 friends who I know who have restaurants, and bring them some beer every once in a while. And that's kind of really it.
Yeah.
And I looked at Tom and I said, you're selling yourself short.
Yeah.
You guys have an opportunity here to do something bigger and better. So again, that was March. He self-distributed the brand. So unlike in Ben's first experience, or his last experience, I should say, before he hooked up with Tom, where he was brewing, cellaring, packaging, and delivering, he only had to brew.
Yeah.
And he only had a package. And Tom's like, yep, I'll just throw the beer in my truck and I'll deliver it every once in a while. And I would say it was by mid to end of May, Tom called me and said, were you serious? Do you really think we have something special here? And I said, no question about it. And he said, I want to come see you because I am not throwing one more keg in the back of my truck or the back of his car, actually, and delivering it to Boston.
Yeah.
He's like, the drive to Boston is insane, especially at 4 o'clock when you catch a bar or a restaurant open. And he's like, I'm just destroying my vehicle. He's like, this is nuts. So we sat down in, I think it was May. So we sat down in May, kind of did the, what are your expectations? What would success feel like to you?
Yeah.
And I remember like it was yesterday. Tom looked at us, kind of our sales team and an operation team in that business, and he said, do you guys think you could get us 13 draft lines in the city of Worcester or Worcester County? And we said, by the end of the year? He said, yep. I said, no doubt. He said, what do you think those 13 draft handles will sell? For total beer. He said, do you think you can maybe sell 1,000 cases in a year? I said, yeah, we can do that. We closed out that year with 40 or 50 draft handles for them and about 3,000 cases of beer.
I was going to say, it sounded like he was selling them short, even there.
Yeah, but it was very early time, right? 2010, when Wormtown opened, we have farmer brewer license issued from the state of Massachusetts, number 37.
Okay.
Right? So that means it was 37th license ever issued. But how many of those were still
around
in business?
Yeah.
Right? So it was, there wasn't a whole lot of success. There wasn't a lot of background to plant your flag on. Breweries like Sierra Nevada and those guys were,
it's what everybody wanted.
But they were tiny compared to their size today. Yeah. And we had also gone through that 80s and 90s craft beer evolution, so guys like, and you think about it locally, Harpoon survived, and not only survived, but flourished through that downfall. Wachusett, very local, but did a great job, and still to this day is doing a phenomenal job. Berkshire Brewing, you had Mercury, which is in the North Shore, and I forget what their brand is now. But so we had this nice little pocket in Massachusetts, but it was still very, very, very limited. And the other thing that didn't exist, and we can talk a little bit about that later, but tap rooms. Mm-hmm. No such thing. Even 2015, when we moved to Shrewsbury Street, it was an unheard of business model. So it was a lot harder to introduce your brand to consumers, than it is today. So, we met with them, kind of what I looked at them. I said, listen, I'm giving you comparisons. At that time, Sierra Nevada for us in the Worcester County market, granted it's not home for Sierra, but we were selling about 9,000 cases of Sierra. We had probably 15 handles, much more of a package store business. But Magic Hat, we had about the same type of volume, 8,000, 9,000 cases with 50 draft lines. So that first year, Wormtown had the same kind of success that brands like Wormtown and the brands like Magic Hat and Sierra were having. So we stood up and took notice, and we recognized that this was a very, very powerful brand with a great story that made incredible beer. It was a fun brand to sell, a fun brand to hand a smiley face to somebody and say, granted, our smiley face looked very, very, very different back then. I used to call it kind of a scary toothless clown. But it was a lot of fun to see that brand grow. And what started happening was tons of pressure on Ben and Tom to go from a brewery that was built on, a $20,000 small business loan to make enough beer to serve one restaurant to all of a sudden have to meet the needs of 15, 18, 20, 40, 50 restaurants. Yeah. They were hand bottling 22-ounce bottles, and what was happening was we were running out of draft beer. So then they had to look at their bottle business and say, how impactful is this? Do we, and so that drove them to focus more on draft beer than it did bottles, and then more capacity, so more tanks, more resources. We need more efficient, cooling systems. We need a bigger cooler. We need to figure out we need a fork truck because now we're not making enough beer to handle by hand. We have to do mechanized, materials handling. So it just constantly was a struggle
Evolving
for them.
and growing.
Absolutely.
So if I can, I want to ask one question before we get into that evolution. When they're going through this phase, let's call it that first year when you over exceeded the expectations, is there 1, 2, 3 reasons why you think that brand caught on so fast? Now, you mentioned a couple of them. Obviously, the beer was fantastic. It had a cool story. But my question is was the story as eloquent and put together back then, or is that kind of developed and the marketing is developed over time? Is it just a combination of everything? What led to the success? Why did it get picked up so fast that first year?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's about the beer, right?
Yeah.
So as long as the beer is excellent, and I don't care where you look, that's a 93 rated beer.
Yeah.
At one point in time before New England IPAs kind of really became the rage, on Beer Advocate, which was the preeminent place that your beer got rated. The two brothers who ran Beer Advocate had Hobby rated as 100 out of 100 for, I think it was 2.5 straight years.
Wow.
So the beer had its chops. The story was good, and there's timing involved in all of this. So the timing of craft beer becoming a little bit more acceptable, a little bit more prevalent. The timing of citrus-forward flavors starting to move into that space, the precursors to the big juicy IPAs of New England style today. Timing of social media,
Yeah.
right? So to build a brand in the 1990s, you either had to hand it to a consumer one by one, or you had to go on national TV, or you had to buy
commercials.
Big, expensive, wasteful commercials. Who could do that? All of a sudden, social media sites like Beer Advocate, which I mentioned a minute ago, start telling 10,000 followers to become 20,000, to become 80,000, become 100,000. Hey, this beer is amazing. You need to try some.
Yeah.
Beer education. But at the same time, behind the scenes, a lot of things were happening that made it easier to make amazing beer than it was prior to. Like in the 90s and et cetera, you have Siebel Institute providing training and education for brewers, which were available for home brewers, not just someone who's working at Anheuser-Busch or Heineken.
Yeah.
Equipment manufacturers were starting to scale down and taking technology and quality designs and scaling them down into smaller models, because that 37 brewery license that we had in Massachusetts quickly became 100 breweries in Massachusetts from 2010 to 2015. Across the country, when we opened in 2010, there was 1,100. 5 years later, there was 3,700. So now you're seeing these equipment manufacturers going, wait a minute, we can scale this down and still make this a profitable, profitable business. At the same time, so aren't farmers. Right? So Valley Malt in Hadley, Mass., which is our primary way to get Massachusetts-grown ingredients into our beer, we're her first customer, and she's opening the first malt house east of the Mississippi since Prohibition.
Wow.
And that happened in Valley, Mass. Now, and Andrea's, she really is the queen of craft malting. She sits on the boards, and there's probably, if there's less than 50 malt houses on the East Coast, I'd be shocked now. And her business went from 10 acres to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres that she is farming and malting for. So, you've got this timing of all of these things colliding at the exact same time, that a great beer in New England's second largest city. And what else happens during that time period? Worcester starts changing.
Yep.
And I'm a Worcester boy, born and raised, 01604, same zip code as the brewery. I always loved Worcester. I love what it was. I was proud of what it was. I love what it is today. My only regret is Kelly Square going away. But Worcester started changing, and the Worcester restaurant scene started changing, and then this amazing journey that the city has been on, especially the last 5 years, just was part of it.
Yep.
I do want to talk a little bit about, you had talked about the marketing and the story and how it evolved. One of the things I am most proud of as a Worcester guy, and as part of what we've played in the brewery, is having people from City Hall or the Chamber or just community leaders consistently thinking of Wormtown's part in helping to tell Worcester's story. So that did evolve in a lot of ways that, when I first started selling Wormtown at the distributor versus, when I came to work for the team versus where it is today, I would say Wormtown at a beer festival, say it was in Boston, or maybe I was doing a sampling at a bar down towards the Cape or whatever that was. And people would say, Wormtown, is that, where's that? Is that Woburn or what? Where is it? And then I tell the story about Worcester. Today,
you don't have to tell that story.
I could be in Colorado at the GABF and people would immediately walk up and say, I'm from Worcester.
Yep.
And my favorite story to tell, and forgive me, my wife calls me Walt Disney. But whenever I'm somewhere way outside of this Worcester area, I call it spreading the love and the flavors and the aromas of Worcester. Someone will say, hey, I'm from Worcester. And I always say, really, where are you from? And if they answer Worcester, I know they're from Holden or Grafton, or they might be from Sutton or Shrewsbury or wherever. But if they're really from Worcester,
they say Grafton Hill.
Grafton Hill. Or they're from the west side, or they're from Maine South. That's when you know somebody's really from Worcester.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun that way.
Yeah.
But the story's evolved, but the industry has. Right now, so I talked about 2005 to 2010, 2010 to 2015. Fast forward 5 more years, close, because we only have 2020 data. Massachusetts is sitting on just shy of 200 breweries.
Wow.
Worcester County, we were the only tap room in 2005 when we opened on Shrewsbury Street. The two closest were Jack's Abbey in Framingham and Wachusett in Westminster, but they didn't even have a tap room.
Yeah.
Now I think there's 4 in the city of Worcester, and within 10 miles of our brewery, I think there's 13 or 14.
Yeah.
State of Massachusetts, like I said, just under 200, but they have over 200 in planning, so that means they've taken their licenses out and they're going through that. And nationwide is over 8,000.
That's nuts.
So
yeah, that's and I definitely want to talk about the tap rooms because I think that's been a huge shift for for everyone, especially in this area and other parts of the country as well. But before I dive into that, if we can go back to we just talked about that amazing growth that you guys went through. It's Ben and Tom at that time, and your company is distributing them, and obviously a huge part of that success and growth. How did they deal with that rapid growth, and what was the next step for Wormtown? It sounds like first thing I think of is you immediately ran out of space.
Absolutely. So Tom began. So we joined, like I said, a couple months after we became their sales and marketing arm, right? So essentially, they're consultants. Tom would constantly be in our offices or on the phone. What do you think of this idea? What do you think of that idea? What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? So we were providing that support at the time. My frontline sales reps were with Ben and Tom a lot, making calls, and they were kind of helping teach them what it was that they needed to sell their beer. But at the same time, Tom took one little spot of Peppercorns, and then he made it a bigger spot. And then he brought in outside containers, the storage containers that you see. And then we were working in the parking lot, or they were working in the parking lot half the time. But they were in year one and recognizing that ice cream shop wasn't going to last.
Yeah.
So he started working with the city. They looked at a bunch of properties around the city. Union Station was actually one of the spots they were ready to go. And also funding became an issue for them.
Yeah.
Talking to banks. They obviously got a bunch of loans throughout the course of that period where they were increasing the size of their brewery. And when you talk normal real estate, increasing the size of something means square footage, right?
Sure.
When you talk about increasing the size of a brewery, it means either adding tanks, which may include square footage, or taking a 5-foot wide tank that's 6 feet tall and putting a 5-foot wide tank that's 8 feet tall. In that same space.
Yeah.
So they were able to do a bunch of that in that same small little 1,100 square foot space. And I would say probably more than any other brewery in history, they got 3,000. By the time we finished on Park Ave, we were just shy of 3,000 barrels in year 4, in 1,000 square feet.
Wow.
So, the first year was 280 barrels, and 3 years later it was 10 times that.
Yeah.
But Tom was looking for space. Tom was looking for capital.
Yep.
And I was aware of that, and I had a vested interest in that the more beer he could get me, the more beer I could sell, because we were totally handcuffed. We're in a situation where every ounce of beer he could make was sold before it was even finished being brewed.
Yep.
I would pick it up and it would just basically go straight to a restaurant.
And I would imagine
and it would be gone.
Yeah, and I would imagine when those restaurants are demanding more, you have to be able to say yes if you want to stay on that draft system.
That's generally the way it works. But then breweries like Treehouse and Trillium have taught you a little differently, which is the more often you tell somebody they can't have something, the harder, faster, and
longer the line gets,
and more effort they'll put in to try and find that. And that's a really cool thing, But we had some of that going very early on, not really through our first 5 years. It was constantly, we got draft lines and we kept them. And I remember the very first moment knowing that it was something special when I had a restaurant run out of the beer. And normally that was the kiss of death for you. Like, you would have to replace that line with something right away, or you would lose it to competition. I remember looking at a restaurant guy and saying, hey, listen, I don't have any Be Hoppy to sell you or bring you this week, but I will have some in about 10 more days. So if I can bring you something in between. And the guy looked at me and said, no, that line will sit empty and it'll wait for that Be Hoppy to come back in. Or at that time, Seven Hills Pale Ale too was just as strong. And that was kind of like an aha moment for me when I said, I've never seen a restaurant owner hold a draft line for a brand.
Yeah.
And that was right when Tom's trying to raise money. He's looking at Union Station. He was chasing, a couple of investors and maybe some funding through traditional sources like banks, small business loans, increasing those. I was introducing him to a few different people that I thought had vested interest and maybe the ability to help them. And in 2012-13, I was presented with an opportunity to sell my ownership stake in my distributorship. And the first moment that I realized that was going to happen, I picked up the phone and I called Tom and I said, hey, I want to talk to you because we've been having conversations, and I'd introduced him and he'd give me some financials to share with people. And I said, I want to talk to you. I have an interesting opportunity. And he said, great. So we went and met, we had a beer, and I said, I've got somebody I think could be a good fit for you guys.
Somebody who knows your business pretty well.
Yep. And he said, all right. I said, I want to join the team. And he just kind of looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? You've got your other business and you kind of legally can't do this. And I said, you're the third person outside of my father who knows this, but I'm selling my business and I'd like to step in and partner with you guys. So that dynamic happened while he was still looking at Union Station.
Okay.
But as a city-owned property, there were hoops and there was a lot of build-out because it was really warehouse back there. Not even warehouse. I don't really know what it was, but it was going to be a very difficult build-out. And the city introduced us to the Worcester Development Corp, which is, kind of the Bronca Batista, Matt Doyle group. And they were renovating the car dealership on Shrewsbury Street. And so the city brought us to them, introduced us. It was literally right as Tom and I agreed on a handshake on what the investment was going to look like and, what my position and role was going to be. And he said, I want to bring you to Shrewsbury Street just to make sure. He said, I think this is where we're going to go. And I said, 100%. Yeah. This is the right spot to go. So that was, 2012 was when we started the conversation. January 1/13 was when I joined. And then we started right away building out Shrewsbury Street, on day one. That's where we hit the ground. And that was kind of, my job was to handle the distribution and sales. And I would say for 3 years, I don't think a case of beer or a keg went out of that building that didn't go in the back of my F-350. I know for a fact I can put 16 kegs in a short bed. I didn't even have an 8-foot, but I had 6-foot F-350. I could put 15 kegs and 80 cases, and I was not overloaded, and I had nothing for a sag in my suspension. But that was about 3 years, and then we got to a box truck, and I ran the box truck for a long time while we were building out, the Shrewsbury Street location. And even that, I remember we moved in, and or as we were building it, I looked at Ben, I said, what can we do here? I said, 15,000 barrels of beer, that's our max. At the time, like I said, we were coming off year 4 at 2,700. And I said, all right, that's cool. So we've got unlimited growth, right? 15,000 barrels. I said, man, we'll be able to sell our beer every state in New England and get to 15,000 barrels. And this is a story I've told over and over again ad nauseum. My goal when I joined Wormtown, and I'd stated it to those guys, was we're going to hit 15,000 barrels when I turn 55 and we'll be in all the New England states. And that'll be, oh my God, I can't believe we accomplished this.
Yeah.
And I turned 50 4 months ago. And we finished 2019. I don't want to talk about 20, but we finished 19 at 31,000 barrels.
Yeah. So you over-exceeded by quite a bit.
We over-exceeded by quite a bit. I remember looking at Ben and the 8,000 square feet we took on Shrewsbury Street and saying, what are we going to do at this space? That was in, again, 13, 14 during build-out. We opened there in 15. Before we opened our doors on Shrewsbury Street, Ben and I, so that was March 17th of 2015, we spent October, November with our distributors saying, okay, we're going to be able to double your orders sometime next year. How soon do you want them doubled? And they said, well, day one.
Yeah.
And I looked at Ben and I said, hey, man, we didn't build big enough. So we had already expanded, hadn't opened the doors yet, and we realized we didn't build big enough. And again, this expansion's not square footage, but it's tanks.
Yep.
So right away we ordered 3 new tanks, which doubled our production capacity from 6,000 barrels to 12. And we finished 15 from 2,800 barrels. We finished 15 at 7,500.
That's nuts.
And we finished 16 at 15,000. So we hit my 20-year plan in 20 months.
Does that mean you're going to retire early?
Oh, man, I tell everybody I retired a long time ago, man. I drink beer for a living. I don't work. So it was crazy. And now that, that original 8,000 square feet, we in that building, we occupy, as of the opening of our new tap room on Shrewsbury Street last month, we occupy probably 36 or 37,000 square feet there. Plus we have 5,000 square foot offsite warehouse too.
Yeah. And so, and I do want to talk about that because I know you guys have other locations now and stuff like that. So that all can come into play. But let's talk about when you first opened Shrewsbury. When you first opened it, was it just a brewery, or did right from the get-go, did you build in the tap room and open up that from the very beginning?
So tap rooms were kind of just starting to become a thing, right? Yeah. And it's amazing. This is an industry I grew up in. My father worked in the beer business before I was born. So he worked for Narragansett in the 60s in Connecticut. He worked for Carling Black Label in Georgia. And then he moved back up here and went to go work at the distributor, which is kind of where I grew up in that world in 71. So I grew up there. And it was a business that is really, really, really slow to change. If you think about the fact that 1980, I think, was when Miller Lite, 78 or 80 was when Miller Lite was introduced. So it took from Prohibition till then for the industry to realize a light beer might be interesting. It took from 78 to 84 for Anheuser-Busch to recognize light beers were a thing. So they introduced Bud Light. And it took from 84 to 94, 95 for Bud Light to outpace Budweiser as the largest beer in the world. Yeah. And things didn't change. I remember very clearly somebody, kind of more of a mentor to me had said one time, listen, this business is really interesting in that every 3 to 4 years we use 12 o'clock plan, and every 3 to 4 years we switch to 6 o'clock plan. And then 3 to 4 years later, we go back to the 12 o'clock, and then we go to the 6, and we go back. But we don't really do anything new, unique, and exciting. Yeah. And legislatively, the industry is pretty regulated, so that reacts the same way too, right? We operate under the same, for the most part, the same rules, laws, regulations that were written in the 21st Amendment. So the idea of a tap room was in our plans from day one. We knew that we wanted one. We knew that it had to be a part of our business, but I clearly remember looking at plans and looking at Ben and saying, hey, man, look, this tap room's 2,000 square feet.
We could use that.
No, the opposite. That's too big.
Really?
And I said, I feel like 2,000 square feet is crazy. And Ben looked at me and said, yeah, no, that's nuts, man. Like, we need that space for brewing.
That's what I was thinking, too. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so we cut our tap room from 2,000 square feet to 1,000 square feet on purpose. 5 years later, you look at that and go, we just spent what we spent to build a 5,000 square foot tap room because the 1,000 square foot tap room was always too small. But 2015, 16, and even a little bit of 17, it was like something nobody in this area had seen before. I mean, we opened up, Jack's was still in their original facility, which was smaller and less interesting than ours was, right? It wasn't in the same type of environment ours was, in such a visible place. And our tap room was like, oh my God, people hadn't seen anything like this. Treehouse, I think, was still operating out of a barn on family property. And they were just planning their first big expansion into Munson, which had a tap room that was probably 500 square feet.
Yeah.
So that didn't really exist. And the ability to sell your beer exclusively direct to consumer without going to restaurants and bars and package stores. I mean, I think even in 2015, Treehouse was still selling a little bit to restaurants and bars. They used to let a little bit leak out back then, but then they realized they didn't have enough to meet their direct to consumer demand. Trillium was going through the same type of stuff on the entrance into the Seaport District. I forget which street they were on originally, but they were starting to feel some of the same stuff. They originally started trying to distribute because that's what you did, but they were getting so many people showing up in their place that they're like, well, we don't have to distribute.
Yeah.
And so they've been amazing at it, and it's been cool to watch. Our business model was a little different, but we opened the tap room. I don't mind saying this. I mean, Tom's a restaurant guy.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at him, and we built our budgets, and he threw a number on the table and said, yeah, that looks like it makes sense. We thought people would come in, maybe have a 4-ounce, try something different, and turn around and walk out and go to eat somewhere. So we were open from March to December. March through December, we were, versus our budget, I think we were about 350, 400% larger than we had planned.
Yeah.
And at that same time, we were getting more restaurant lines and selling more beer at package stores. And, the tap room, as fun and as exciting and, as sexy as it kind of is, because everybody thinks being in a bar and owning a bar is amazing.
Yep.
When it's really a lot of hard work and a lot of stress. But that tap room has still always only been
small fraction of your business.
5%.
Yeah.
5%, 4% of our total business.
Yeah. But now the question is how much does that tap room add to your community, right? And the people that follow you. That's why I wrote down on the tap room as well. Definitely something I wanted to talk about. I agree with you. It's the sexy piece. It's not the revenue driver, but
it's a profit driver.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. It's definitely a profit driver.
Yep.
But it also seems like that's one of the best ways to create your community around your beer. And so you guys are on social now, and you guys are doing a lot of stuff with it. And I think, at least around here, we're at the point where I can't tell you the last time somebody said, hey, do you want to meet up at a bar, a traditional bar, versus let's go to one of the tap rooms locally.
Yep.
That's where everybody wants to go, and everybody wants to try the craft beer, and they want to go to new places, and they want to sit with the brewers. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so, to me, that's I always looked at that as a great way for you guys to kind of build your community. And you guys then added a new location out towards Gillette Stadium.
Correct.
Now, how did that come about, and why?
Yeah, so I'll jump in kind of a couple things there and walk it back a little bit. The tap room is we call it our best, easiest, and most effective way to tell our story to a consumer, right? So if we're selling at a restaurant or bar, someone might describe the beer, but they don't quite describe it the same way. They may not know where the nickname came from or the name Wormtown. They may not know the perfect ingredients that go into be hoppy or whatever that is. So this is really outside of social media, it's our most important way to connect with consumers through our tap room. So it's really as much about marketing for us as it is about operating, a profitable side piece of our business. In addition to that, we took painstaking steps to ensure that we really operated as a partner to the restaurants and bars, especially on Shrewsbury Street.
Yep.
As opposed to competition, right?
Yeah.
So, I talked a little bit about going from 2,000 square feet to one. No bar seats when we first began, no real food, a pretzel, and also kind of like that McDonald's mentality of make the place nice enough and clean enough and interesting enough that people want to be there, but not so they want to stay.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I'm proud of the fact that most of the restaurants in that area, matter of fact, all carried out beer. But a lot of them would tell me that from the day we opened, they had a better year.
Yep.
and their years got better and better and better. And that meant we were drawing people to the city. That meant, so beer tourism is real. That meant we were drawing people to Shrewsbury Street, and they were experiencing places maybe they hadn't before. So that was really cool. And we just tried to do our best to keep the tap room interesting enough that people wanted to be there, but not so interesting that they stopped going to all the other places, right?
Makes perfect sense.
And your generation, you're a young guy, sure, bouncing around tap rooms in uncomfortable places and having some beers and, playing cornhole was great. But, my dad wasn't going to do that. He's still going to go out and he wants to sit in a leather chair and, and have a drink. So, And the other thing we couldn't do, any of the Farmer Brewery tap rooms, is we couldn't sell anything but what we made, which meant we were limited to beer. You couldn't, if you were someone who was, just didn't like beer, you couldn't come have a glass of wine. You couldn't come have a mixed drink. If you're somebody who maybe had, celiac or just some type of gluten issues, very hard to make a good gluten-free beer.
Yeah.
So we weren't an option for you either, yet the restaurants all were, because they could play in that space, and that's intentional too.
Yep.
So we're kind of in the same space, but we're not quite direct competition, with those guys. So fast forward after 2015, we started growing. We actually hit the 100th. We were just inside the top 100 largest breweries in the United States. Pretty cool considering it was 7,500, 8,000 at the time. And right around that time, there was another Massachusetts brewery who had opened a little pop-up, kind of one of those take over a space, fill it with cornhole boards, don't actually brew anything there, and try and draw some people in at Patriot Place. So we're actually right in Patriot Place. You can see Gillette Stadium from right inside our patio, and Patriot Place's leadership and ownership team, obviously, and their marketing group just really liked the idea of having a brewery on site, something that's actually brick and mortar and manufacturing beer, and a little bit more than just a pop-up. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we ended up on their radar screen. This was an approach from them to us, not something we were looking for. We hadn't really talked about having another tap room very much. If we had, our conversations were maybe that we could put one in different parts of New England, which would kind of make us more local everywhere we went. And, Foxborough, while it's not Worcester County, it's still pretty close.
It's still our Patriots, right?
Correct. But you can be there 45, 50 minutes, right? But when they reached out to us, and the connection to the Patriots and the Kraft family and everything they've meant to the community and the success of the team and the spectacular facility that they have built down there between the stadium and Patriot Place itself, and the traffic count, and this is one of the things that always kind of is an eye-opener for people when they're like, oh my God, Patriots games. I said, you guys don't understand that, the busiest day of the year is a Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah.
The second busiest day of the year is Country Fest, and that lasts 3, 4, 5 days. But more importantly, that place is busy April, May, June, July. No football games, no concerts till June, July. But, and actually I think they told me their second busiest day for their restaurants on that whole property is their high school soccer jamboree.
Makes sense.
15,
anything
20,
that draws
30,
in the
40.
numbers. And it goes all year round. There's charity events, everything.
Absolutely. And that place is a destination in and of itself for dining and drinking all year long. And I can tell everybody that, February, pre-COVID last year, so that was our first year. We were there January, February, and the first half of March. We had one Patriots home game. That was it. Everything else, every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday was without football. And that place was busier than our Worcester tap room was every single weekend pre-COVID. Yeah. So it's a really cool place. As landlords, amazing people.
Really?
They were so good to all of their tenants, especially when COVID hit. And kind of timing-wise, if you think about, Brady was leaving, and, a lot of people were Camp Brady versus Camp Belichick, Kraft, or vice versa. My answer was I hated to see Brady leave, but I will not say a bad thing about the Kraft family and how they treat their people, how they treat their partners, And even before that experience, I mean, their team was in our business as if they were a partner. Hey, we noticed, I can remember during the design phase, we sent them our signage. We had to send them their signage. They wanted to approve it. Obviously, I understand why. But I just remember their team coming to us and saying, we don't like the placement of this one particular sign. We like the sign, but we think it'll be far more effective if you move it 3 feet to the left. And I'm like, what do you, this is a professional design guy who designed this. And he said, come down to the property. I want you to stand with me and see. And I'm like, oh my God, and then the social media that what are you thinking about this? What do you think? The opportunities they brought us, they reached out to every restaurant in that place to introduce us to them and say, what about doing BYOF to Wormtown Brewery? And they created these partnerships for us. They've been incredible partners, and it shows that they are throughout the class organization that they appear to be on the field.
Yep.
They take to all of their businesses, and obviously they're a Worcester-based company too. Yep. Ultimately. So,
I love that. Now, we continue on. You guys are seeing you're growing. You have new tap rooms open, new locations open, and now tell me a little bit about the distillery.
Sure. So, passion project for many of us for a while. If COVID had not hit, we would have an open and functioning and distillery selling our spirits, because this was something we were working on 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
I mentioned Ben had worked at Neshoba, and where he professionally distilled, and they make some really good stuff. One of our longest tenured employee, Ben Pratt, who's a lead brewer for us, he also worked at Neshoba and distilled. So we have 2 members of our team that have professional distilling experience. But among brewery people, and this is a little bit of a stereotype, maybe along with the beards and everything else in plaid shirts. Both. Well, I'm not wearing plaid today, but I do have sort of a beard. There's a real passion for brown spirits.
Really?
We may talk as much in our own time about whiskey we've drank recently or the best bourbon we've had recently as much as we talk about beer. So it just was kind of a natural interest for us. Laws changed in Massachusetts. I know I talked earlier about how they don't change very often, but for some reason with tap rooms they do. And laws have changed in Massachusetts recently, quite frankly, driven by the efforts of Neshoba and to some extent Wachusett Brewery, actually a big extent to Wachusett Brewery, that allows us to kind of navigate waters and have both a farmer brewer's license for brewing, a farmer brewer's license for distilling, a farmer brewing license for farmer winery. So obviously it's not a farmer brewery license for distilling, it's a farmer distilling license, farmer winery license, farmer brewing license. And it allows us to kind of layer those things. Still limits us to only selling what we make. Okay. But, we looked at our taproom business and we said, there's a lot of people come in here and one of the first things they say is, I generally don't like beer. And it might be a husband with a wife on a date, or it might be a wife with a husband on a date, or, every combination that you can come up with, there's oftentimes somebody who just doesn't really like beer.
Yeah.
And we said, well, there's an opportunity for us there, on top of the fact that we love it, and as Ben will tell everybody, when he started brewing, it wasn't to make beer to sell to anybody. It was because he wanted to make something that he wanted to enjoy himself.
Yeah.
And kind of our vision for distilling was, we've got a bunch of guys and girls here who would love drinking what we make, so let's make it. And we're like, well, if we're going to make it, let's at least make it so that other people, if they want, can enjoy it. And on the back side of that, from more of like a commercial application, while all these seltzers have been exploding, I personally have been a little more passionate about what I think in the industry, or at least I call craft can cocktails.
Okay.
So you can see some of the stuff that's been done by some of the bigger spirits companies where they're, taking a vodka tonic or a vodka lemonade or a Moscow Mule or 1,000 of the variations of those drinks and providing them in a can that you can bring to the beach where you can't exactly set up a bar.
Yeah.
And you can't exactly mix and everything else, but maybe it's just not your day for beer, but you want to have a little bit of alcohol, and you want to have something maybe a little sweeter or lower in calories or carbs, or you don't care about lower in calories and carbs, you want a little more kick.
Yep.
And I thought that the seltzer space was very interesting and flooded, but maybe our opportunity commercially was craft can cocktail. So we had a commercial driver for it. We had a taproom driver for it. More importantly, we had passion in our team that really wanted to get behind it, and we were heading down that road. And we had a lease ready and executed. We were buying our equipment, and we had our licensing ready to go. And COVID hit, and man, it was like, holy smokes, we need to put the brakes on this, because I'm not sure tap rooms will ever rebound. I mean, I clearly, honestly thought myself that package stores would be shut down within days of restaurants and bars being shut down. So I thought we were going completely silent, and that might have been the end of our run. The opposite happened. Package stores became busier than ever. Our brand bounced back very, very, very quickly. But instead of being a draft-driven brand, we had to become a package-driven brand. So we weren't making kegs, we were making cans and bottles. So we had to focus on surviving COVID. And as the summer kind of came on and business started feeling a lot more normal and production started feeling a lot more normal, we were looking at our tap room going, man, it's really busy, like way busier than we ever expected. But of course, we were selling vegetable medleys. We were selling, all of our food to go. You could buy a hamburger, hot dog, all to go, right? The vegetable box was still amazing. People would just order a box. It was guaranteed to have 25 pounds of vegetables in it for $25, but you did not know what you were getting. And they're all from local farms. Yeah. But we could not get enough of those. We were selling 50, 60 of those a weekend. But that was kind of the fun, creative stuff we did, partnering with Volturno to do pizza and beers to go right out of our parking lot. Yeah. But as we started looking at it, I'm a Polish kid. I grew up on Grafton Hill, Worcester East Middle, and Roosevelt. So sometimes it takes a little bit to sink in for me. Yeah.
You got to get head over the head.
Yeah, sometimes. And it was like August, and I'm like, oh, this has been amazing. And, you're kind of blinded by unexpected positive impacts on your business. And it was like, oh, this is great. Oh, shit, we live in New England. Going all the way back to Tom's Ice Cream. Yep. Oh, my God, November's coming. So, once we sat down and realized November was coming and our 1,000-square-foot tap room wasn't going to have the outdoor beer garden that we're getting ready to reopen, and it wasn't going to have the outdoor patio as effective as it was, and social distancing and limits on seating were getting worse, we realized our tap room just wasn't going to cut it, and that brought us all the way back to revisiting the distillery. And we looked at the space that was available, and, everything was just everybody was a little more nervous. You're not ready to take the same risks that you were pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. You don't have the projected growth. You don't have the confidence. So our original distillery plan was going to take over the old Seven Nana space, which was like 8,000 square feet, and do something really, really, really dynamic with a new tap room. COVID hit, we went dark, and our landlords came to us about the same time we were thinking about this again, and Simjang had pulled out of the space. Mm-hmm. And they said, I know you were going to do a full build-out in 8,000 square feet, but we have a built-out space right here that's really, for lack of a better description, paint and wallpaper.
It's a cool space already.
It's a very cool space. It's connected to our brewery. It's unfortunate you can't see it, but right out the back wall is the front wall to our brewery, vice versa. So it's still home for us. It's right there, and it was a far less risky and capital intensive opportunity, and it still filled the need, which is it gave us the opportunity to apply for our spirits license, distilling license. It gave us a much bigger space that even under the tightest COVID regulations and social distancing we could come up with, had a larger capacity than our original space did. And as that stuff loosens and as we start to get to some sense of normalcy, it's a far bigger space than what we came from, and a far more interesting space.
Yeah.
And we had to be more interesting, right? We talked about 2015, our tap room being cutting edge. What's happened since then? Treehouse built what they built in Charlton, which is Disney World for craft beer. You've got the guys at Stone Cow out in Rutland, and
the barbecue and the
barbecue,
playground,
go sledding, launch pumpkins in a trellis. The playground thing still kind of freaks me out a little bit because last time I checked, McDonald's had to get rid of those merry-go-rounds. But the kids have a blast, and good for them. But
there's a pricker bush at the bottom of that sledding hill. My son knows the hard way.
Sure,
so.
Absolutely, man. But it's what they're offering is amazing.
Yeah.
And you can't offer that in the city of Worcester. We're urban. We're not on country campuses like that. But we figured we could take that space and turn it into a really cool urban brewery immersion and distilling platform. And that's kind of what we want to do. But like I've told everybody, man, if all we do is make some spirits and find some incredible flavors that we learn about and we can figure out how to blend, which I'm super excited about that concept, to figure out a way to do that. And, our team's working on it hard now. And if all we do is drink the stuff ourselves, then I'm the happiest guy in the world.
Yeah.
If it turns out that other people like it, and maybe they want to take some home when they leave there, or maybe they want to buy some of our craft can cocktails, then, that's all just gravy.
Yeah. So the distillery's open now.
The new tap room is open now.
A new tap room is open now.
Distilling will be more like fall. So it takes about 9 months from the time you have a lease signed to get a distilling license.
Got it.
So we're a couple months into that process now, and then you've got to go through the process of actually producing the spirits and then aging and all that stuff. So that'll continue to be an evolving step, but it's something our team's working on hard right now, which is pretty cool.
Gotcha. Any anticipated timelines, or is it all so many moving parts? Not quite sure yet.
I think, but I've always been wrong. I err on the aggressive side, not the conservative side of this. But I think we will have our actual distilling permit in place probably by late summer, early fall. We can have equipment in place far before that. So we have some space already set aside in the building that's been painted, and the floors have been pitched, and the services that support that are all in place. So we can get that up and running. And then it's just depending on, what you want, like whites, vodkas, rums, they come out pretty quickly. There's not a lot of tank time involved in that process, but getting a really good aged bourbon, that's 5 years.
Yeah.
A really interesting blended bourbon where maybe, and I might be letting a little cat out of the bag here, but maybe you get some.
That's what I'm trying to get out of you anyway. So
maybe you get some. Yeah, you think about one of the coolest things that happen in craft beer is collaboration.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's us collaborating with Table Talk.
Yeah.
Pumpkin
beers and.
Yep, absolutely. Us collaborating with Coney Island, and putting hot dog buns in a beer, or doing, which we've done all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But breweries collaborating with breweries, us with Wachusett and Greater Good for, charities in the city of Worcester, or, we've done ones with breweries from Vermont to New York to California to you name it, right? How cool would it be to go to some really, really, really interesting distilleries, some small, some big, and introduce the concept of collaboration with them. And they've done some beer spirits collaborations as well. And then being able to take their talents and their resources, but blend them into a Wormtown flavor profile in a Wormtown way, and bring that back to our distillery so that we can have some of those really rich, bourbon experiences.
That's what I'm thinking,
and that's, that to me is really, really, really cool. Yeah. And the excitement behind our team going on a project like that and going to, I mean, I'm not promising they will, but I can see them taking trips to Scotland, and learning as much as I can over there and tasting and flavoring and understanding and being able to bring some of that home and make it ours and put our stamp on it. And that, I just think that's a really cool opportunity.
I agree. I also think the craft can cocktails, I think is what you called them.
Yes.
That's interesting too. I think that's, that's stuff. I don't know what my wife, I see more of that stuff end up in my refrigerator nowadays. So I definitely see that stuff coming as well. Don't let any cats out of the bag, but if you could, what kind of stuff would you like to see?
What I like to see is the one thing I know is I'm not the talented guy when it comes to that stuff. So, I stay out of, Ben Roesch's way when it comes to that stuff, and Scott Drake, our head brewer's way, and really that entire team. At the end of the day, the stuff that is really popular in that space is, vodka soda, if you want to look at calorie carb count. Yep. And it's vodka lemonade if you want to sell a lot, but that doesn't mean that's what you're limited to. Yeah. But that's the popular stuff. And if you look at the data, those two particular styles are probably 75-80% of the revenue and sales in that segment. Yeah. But it can always be a lot more fun. It can always be a lot more interesting than that. Personally, myself, I would love to see an Ocean Spray Wormtown,
collaboration.
That would be unbelievable. Yeah. But then it's interesting how tightly that category really plays within seltzer. So, kind of as an example, we all know that the White Claw phenomenon, right? Yep. It's just. People went crazy for White Claw for a while, right? But at least and it's not that that's a female, but we see it a lot because we still drink a lot of beer. But my wife and all of her friends for 2 years have been on the High Noon thing. Yep. High Noon. They literally have group chats and they follow things on social media that literally post, "Hey, this package store has 5 cases of High Noon," blah blah blah, and they go running down there. It's insanity, but High Noon's vodka based. Yeah. Most people think of it as seltzer because it says seltzer on the outer carton, but when you grab the individual can, it's a vodka soda with lemon flavors, or it's a vodka soda with cranberry flavors, or whatever that may be. So there's a ton of layover within that space, and then within that, you've got the calorie alc content carb conscious, right? So you see mostly 4% to 5% alcohol. You see, a couple grams of carbs and somewhere less than 100 calories. But then you go to another great local success story, which is Sons of Liberty, Loyal Lemonade down in Rhode Island. As a matter of fact, he just sold that brand to a multinational company. But, Loyal Lemonade is not focused on carb count. It's not focused on calorie count. It's also not a low alcohol offering. It's more like 7.8%. Yep. So I clearly anticipate that you'll see us be in both spaces, right? So it'll be something that's calorie carb conscious, vodka lemonades or vodka sodas. But then, we talk about the thought that,
something that's just delicious.
A mixed drink is a mixed drink, right? It's not low. A lot of them are not low in cal and not low in alc. So maybe there's a big, bold Wormtown Worcester in your face 16-ounce can that doesn't care about those things. It's delicious, as you said, and oh my God, it's 7.8% alcohol in a 16-ounce serving or something along those lines. So we've got all that stuff in the tank, and we're just having a lot of fun, understanding it right now.
I love it. It was great to hear the founder's story, but also kind of a glimpse into the future for you guys as well. I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you sharing with us. It was definitely a lot of information. It was a lot of new stuff I didn't even find about you guys online, and you guys do a really good job with the marketing, so you can definitely hear that story online. Cool. Excited to see what you guys got.
Awesome. Thank you.
Coming up.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. And I apologize for not bringing any beer with me.
No, you're good.
Actually, we just launched our seltzer. We canned it for the first time yesterday, so that'll be hitting the market, and I should have at least brought some of that out to sample.
I'll wait for the bourbon, though. When you get the bourbon, then we're talking.
I'll let you know. Perfect.
All right. Thanks for being on, bud.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Founder Story Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And don't forget to check out some of the other great stories.